So if I just do a quick introduction, Begonya, I think, is the right pronunciation, but please correct me if I've got it wrong. She's a sort of patient involved in patient engagement and research coordinator at Sant Joan Hospital in Spain, in Barcelona, I believe, or thereabouts. And she's got a long experience in the involvement of patients and families in research initiatives. We've heard quite a lot of how things work in the UK, and I think we're very much looking forward to seeing how things work in Barcelona and Spain, and more generally, and looking forward to a very interesting and exciting talk. So thank you very much, and the floor is yours, as they say, or the virtual room is yours, I should say.
Okay, great. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. 1 second. And I'm glad also to speak today not only about what we do from Sant Joan de Déu Children's Hospital, also what we are doing at the European level, because when we talk about the involvement of children and young people, mainly we work with collaborative projects, and we have a very strong collaboration with our colleagues in UK, because they were the first ones around the world to involve children and young people in activities related to the drug development process about clinical trials. First of all, let me introduce a little bit why it's important to involve children and young people in health science, in clinical research, and specifically in clinical trials. One important number that usually we share in this kind of conferences is the young people. They represent a huge number of the European population. They represent the 21% of the population. But what we need to realize is at the end, they represent our future. And it's an investment in a healthy society if we involve children and young people in these kind of activities that help us to make more patient or citizens-centric science. Secondly, it's important to highlight that the children, the minors, they have rights. The Convention of the Rights of the Child was launched in 1989 by the United Nations and has the endorsement of UNICEF. And among the different rights, there is one that is key for us for the activities of involving children in health science, that it's the article number 12, that this article stands that the minors, the children, they have the right to freely express their views in any decision that at the end matters to them. And obviously health is one huge area in which they need to be involved and where we need to listen to them, but also research. And this is the framework that we need to consider when we involve minors, because they have the right, and at the end what we need to do is facilitate the right way to involve them. In terms of the definition of the patient voice, at the end, what we want to do in any project about pediatric patients and clinical research, it's involving them to gather what you can read in this sentence in the slide, a specific and unique perspective that the only way that we can include in our project is involving directly the patients. In some cases, probably we cannot involve them for the condition or for the age, but always there are the parents or the caregivers that they can provide this feedback and this perspective to ensure that at the end the patients that will be involved in our project will be according with the design in which we are working. What we pretend when we talk about the patient voice and the patient involvement, it's work with the patients as part of our research team and do something that in the slide you can read that it's nothing about them or about me if we personalize in first person this sentence without me. In terms of patient centricity, that that it's a term that we are using a lot nowadays, and it's the main pillar to talk about this new paradigm in science. What underneath this concept, it's ask to the patients from the very beginning, and in the slide you have a nice metaphor that usually we spend a lot of time designing the bridge, but not enough time thinking in the people that needs to cross this bridge. And this is the perspective of this new paradigm of the patient centricity, that it's involve the patients or the families from the very beginning in terms to design this project accordingly with their needs. This approach, obviously, it's good for the sponsors because it's good for the projects, but at the end, it's going to impact in the patients that will take part of this study, but obviously will have a long-term impact in the future patients that can access to this treatment if finally it's approved after the clinical trial. How involve children and young people, because when we talk about the involvement of adults, it's a long experience. From the regulatory point of view, the first patient that was part of a meeting in the European Medicines Agency was in 1995. But the involvement of children and young people still, it's not a common practice. There are few experiences if we compare with the adult setting, and we need to take into account that children and young people, they are not small adults. They have specific needs, and these rights that I have mentioned previously, and all these specificities, we need to take them into account. When we involve children and young people, it's a key element, the transparency and the objectivity. They need to know about the goal, the objective of our project, how much time we are going to request to them to be involved, which is the role, etc. As much information, the better, because this will help them to understand from the very beginning what we want to achieve at the end of this activity. We need to consider special needs, because we are talking mainly about children and young people that have conditions, and some of these conditions sometimes can entail a specific special need. We need to facilitate the means for involvement. The topic of this talk is to explain how we are working in the COVID-19 times, and it means for us opportunities, because sometimes the face-to-face activities of patient involvement are more complex, in some cases, to organize than the virtual ones. That is how we are working in the pandemic times, and obviously facilitate the right means for the involvement of children and young people. It's essential for the success of the activities. We need to consider the ethics principles of clinical research and again, the rights of the children, analyze if there is any potential conflict of interest in the past or in the future, the compensation and the reimbursement of the activity, because to perform activities of patient involvement, we need to have budget to do it. And obviously the patients and the families, they need to be compensated by their time. And my last point that I'm going to repeat in the next slides, it's to choose the best methodology. We are talking about children. They are naive in science and in clinical trials and in general about the drug development process. And we need to facilitate as much we can these activities in friendly and easy formats for them. When we can involve the children and the young people, we can involve them along the whole process of the drug development. It means that from the very beginning, in which probably are necessary, any action from the awareness perspective, discussions about unmet medical needs, the design of the clinical trial protocol, they can assess in the recruitment strategy, they can help us to be sure that the assent and the consent document are friendly for them in terms to understand the information, strategies for the retention, the follow-up, in the case that would be necessary in specific studies, but also they can participate or be involved in the review of the protocols, considering the ethics perspective, and probably the parents, they can be members of the trial steering committee or the data and safety monitoring committee. Said this, as you can see in this slide, there are many opportunities in every of these moments to involve the patients and the family. Every project is different. There is no gold standard in which we can say, okay, these specific studies, this is the right moment to involve the patients and this is the right methodology. In this sense, every project requires a plan, to analyze where it's meaningful the involvement of the children and the young people or the parents, and design the right methodology for the activity. Said this, and talking about methodology, there are different methodologies that we can perform, and what you need to take into account is that it's a key aspect for the success of the activity. We can perform focus groups, questionnaires, interviews, the patient journey. For us, the patient journey is to visit and to analyze the most meaningful sections of the protocol, of the clinical trial protocol, and gather the feedback from the patients. We can involve them in advisory boards and steering committees, but also there is a nice opportunity to involve patients and family that it's in simulation. Simulation is the closest methodology to the real world, where we can replicate the specific elements of the protocol, record this session, and afterwards analyze what needs to be improved before the clinical trial will be implemented in the different sites. Said this, and talking specifically about the COVID-19 pandemic, what we are doing at this moment, as I have mentioned previously, it's involved in a virtual format, the patients, focus groups, interviews, the patient journey, all these activities have been performed using teleconference tools, but also other digital tools such as blackboards, digital pools, etc., in order to facilitate the most interactive format for these activities, because it's hard sometimes to replicate the environment and the atmosphere that we can have in a face-to-face activity. Benefits of involving pediatric patients. Here in this slide, you have a data from a publication that came from the adult setting, but we can extrapolate easily. It's very visual, the slide and the numbers, and it's a nice example about the investment that you need to do sometimes to work with patients. It's a big investment. It's usually you can perform activities with less budget, but the revenue, the income that invest in patients involvement activities that generates for the clinical trial, it's huge. It means that there is a big and an important return on investment for the sponsor companies when you involve the patients. And something very important regarding this number in this slide is that as early you involve the patients, probably you can avoid protocol amendments that that are quite expensive. Diversity in patient engagement needs to represent the real world. You know that in clinical trials, it's very important to gather this diversity because, as you can read in the slide, clinical trials are not a privileged opportunity for small groups of people. We need to take into account which is the diversity that specific conditions and in specific countries entails the disease of a clinical trial, and to try to replicate this diversity when we do patient involvement activities. It means consider the ethnicity, the gender, the geography, the socioeconomic status, and probably other features. If we consider this, the outcome of the patient involvement activities or the patient engagement activities probably will be higher than if we perform a very standard process to recruit the patients, not considering which is the diversity that is underneath of these specific conditions that affect the pediatric population. Said this, there are different ways to involve the children and the young people. Sometimes we work with a very focused disease activities. It means that we need to set up ad hoc a focus group, a patient journey activity with patients or with parents, because it's necessary as a criteria to participate in the activity to live with the condition. But in other cases, the requests of services that we receive from sponsors or other stakeholders basically are based in gather the approach of the young people experience in general, not living with a specific condition. In this sense, we have the young persons advisory groups. These are groups of young people that are linked or under the umbrella of a pediatric hospital. They have been trained in clinical trials, innovation, and in general in clinical research, and they are ready to provide feedback in the activities that previously I have shown you in the slide about, for example, the review of educational materials, the assent or the consent documents of a clinical trial. Said this, and also in order to ensure that the activities in which the young persons advisory groups are involved are diverse, we created the European Young Persons Advisory Group Network, EUPACnet. You can see here in the slide the funder teams and the teams that at this moment are part of the network. And according to the specific project in what we want to involve the EUPACs, we will choose the right teams to be involved. Also, if you go to the internet, we have a nice website where you can see the teams that are involved in our network and the different services and activities that we perform. One important aspect to involve children and young people in clinical trials, it's the training, it's the education, because as I have mentioned, in general, the young people and also the young patients, they are naive on science, and it's our responsibility as a pediatric hospital organizing these activities of patient involvement to guarantee that the young people are ready to be engaged and to participate in patients' involvement activities. In this screenshot, you can see the homepage of on online training that we have created with a native health project. The name is Youngsters Engagement in Health. And here we have created 4 educational modules. The first one is about designing research projects with children and young citizens. The second one is about the co-creation of protocols. The third one is about the involvement of young people in the quality of life and patient-reported outcome measures discussions. And finally, we have a last module about how the young people can be involved in the design of research information for your patients. This digital training program has a toolkit with different resources and activities. We have lesson plans. These are documents for the teachers, or because also this training is open for high school students, but also for the facilitators of YPACs, facilitators of groups of young people linked to pediatric hospitals. And in these lesson plans, we have all the instructions and information for these facilitators or teachers to perform this training program. We have also a section of resources and a glossary to cover all the technical terms that the young people, teachers, or facilitators, they need to know. Each of these models has been created or co-created with young people, and all the activities are focused in case studies. For example, in this model about the design of research projects, we work with the case of Sally. Sally is a young patient with lupus, and around this condition, we are covering topics, for example, related to the rights of the children, or how children can be involved in ethical discussions about clinical trials. We have activities to be performed in a group or individually in this training program. And this year, we are working in a second level of this training that is focused in the field of the medical devices. As you probably are aware, in May of this year was launched the European regulation of medical devices that mainly from the patient involvement side establishes the need to perform clinical trials with medical devices. And in this sense, and in order to facilitate that the young people will be ready to be engaged in this field, what we are doing, and this is a work in process project, it's to design also a training program to ensure that we can equip the young people to participate in the co-design of medical devices, in discussions about data sharing and the rights of the young people, how we can make a better patient experience when we design a medical device, and finally, how we can communicate and disseminate the importance and how meaningful it's the involvement of children and young people in science. This is an example of the lesson plan that previously I have mentioned. It's a very nice tool to support the facilitators or the teachers. And something that I want to highlight is the importance of plan, or the planning of patient involvement activities. As you can imagine, it requires time. Involve children and young people means that you need to deal with young people that they are in the school. Probably, in the majority of the cases, if they are patients, they have a condition, and you need to take into account many aspects before the performance of the activity of patient involvement. In this sense, as much you can plan in detail your activity, the better for the success. And something that is very important is to measure, which is the final feedback about the involvement of children and young people, and how you can impact future projects. And finally, here you have 10 top tips about my talk today. Important, better trials for children and young people means a future health society. Children and young people deserve the right to be involved in science and in research. Patient involvement in research is research carried out with or by the patients, and not about or for them. Patient-centric clinical trials benefit the research itself, but especially the patient experience of the ones that will participate in a specific study. The involvement of children and young people requires expertise, planning, and assessment. Patients deserve to be involved along the clinical trial, and as soon the better, because it's the right moment to be involved in decisions that probably if you are engaged late, it's so difficult to change. Methodologies for involving children and young people make it more suitable in terms of participation. Patient involvement activities require an investment that can have a huge impact in terms of the return on investment and the return on engagement. Diversity is an important element and needs to be included in the planning of any patient involvement activity. And finally, devoted networks of YPACs can help sponsors in the amazing world to involve minors and young citizens in clinical trials. Thank you so much.
So I guess it would be good if anyone came up with some questions. We've got 10 minutes or more, or just under 10 minutes, so that would be great. Maybe I could start off with one, and again, we discussed it in the UK, was you're generating data across many European states, different regulations, different things. How do you integrate those data sets, and how does that work? Because obviously if you want to power things up and actually make those data sets interoperable, and has GDPR helped you or hindered you in terms of getting there?
Yeah, the good thing that we have in the European environment is that, we have the European Medicines Agency that mainly, pediatric clinical trials are assessed by EMA. The GDPR, obviously, it's an umbrella regulation that helps any activity with minors. But something that it's a little bit different across the different European countries, it's the age in which the children and the young people they need to assent to be part of a clinical trial. For example, in Spain, it's from 12 years and onwards, but in other European countries, it can be younger or in an older age. And this is a limitation because in some cases, we cannot standardize the same activities and we need to specifically work country by country. But beyond this and the European environment, it's quite easy to collaborate. One question that we formulate at the very beginning to the sponsor that is interested in a patient involvement activities, where you are going to open sites in this pediatric study in order to involve with the same activity, because it's key, replicate the same activity in the different European countries in which the trial is going to be working. But beyond probably the assent aspect, for the other elements, we are very well organized and it's feasible to work together. And also we have other projects in which there is a global network of YPACs, and also we have been working internationally. This is the reason of our network work, all together and trying to replicate the clinical trials world, that it's a multi-country experience, not only in one country.
No, very interesting. And again, in terms of children who are below 12 or whatever the age is, can parents consent on their behalf? And how does that work? Does that vary? So basically the child has to consent, even if the parent says it's a high unmet medical need, I would like my child to go. Because obviously in cancer, for example, just to give you another example, clearly if the child is facing, a very sort of potential death, then parents can sort of consent their children, but that's not the custom, or that's not allowed under the current guidance. Is that correct?
Yeah, the assent it's mandatory. As I said, the age it's different in every European country, but it's mandatory. It means that, for example, in Spain, if the age to request the assent it's 12 years and onwards, we need to have the agreement of the teenager in this case and the parents. If they are not aligned and there is, a different decision, we need to work from the clinical side to achieve an agreement. But if the young person said no for the clinical trial, this is a right that they have, and the patient at the end is not going to be involved in the study. We need to respect the decision because the regulation and all the laws consider that they have maturity to take decisions that concern their health, and the decision to be part of a clinical trial it's in this list. Yeah,
thank you very much. That's very, very helpful. Any other questions? I'm just looking on the various discussion boards and Q&A. Is there anyone who's got another question? Because we've got another 5 minutes or so that might be useful to use up.
Yeah, and for questions that people want to send us, we can always forward it to Begonya as well, and she could answer it via email too. You can learn more about her hospital. We'll share links to her hospital as well that she's working with, so you guys could do research on that. She just put a begonya.nafria at sjd.es. Perfect. Awesome.
Yes, you have here my email in the case that you have specific questions or you need to reach me.
One other question, I guess, we heard from companies like Cambridge Cognition that often develop cognitive tools that are like games, that rather than, word tasks. Are there sort of, specific ones for children that are more like a game than a crossword, say, or something like that? Because I guess that might make it more appealing and you get better compliance and so on and so forth.
Yes, we are considering gamification in general because in some cases it's a very friendly way for the youngest ones to introduce complex concepts because, placebo, it's not easy to be understood. Clinical trial is the same. And in order to involve these young people in any discussion about a clinical study, they need at least to have this minimum knowledge about this terminology. And yes, we are using videos, cartoons, comics, games. We have plenty of tools to facilitate, first of all, this capacity building that they need to be engaged.
And I think, interestingly, it's quite a controversial topic, about the use of computer games versus physical activity. I mean, do you think you'd see a difference cognitively? Because, when I was young, there were no computer games, right? It was all sort of physical activity, and now it's computer games. Did you see any difference between those, or are they measuring the same thing, do you think?
No, I think that we need to see the opportunities. Obviously, we need to assess the games because not always all of them are suitable. But if we assess from, the quality of the pedagogical design and we consider that this is helpful, there is no problem. Also, in some projects or initiatives, also we are using virtual reality. As better we can educate and offer the right skills to be engaged, the better. We don't have any problem, but obviously every game, every experience of gamification or virtual reality needs to be assessed. This is important, but we have more opportunities to better equip the young people with the IT tools, obviously. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think probably we should move over to the next talk, which is me, I think. So I have to chair myself and try and keep myself to time. But thank you very much, and please reach out to Begonya, with further questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Begonya, for your presentation.